So now, the priest is purifying the pen, and you are kneeling right there at your normal place. Now, he will either do one of two things after purifying the pen. He will turn around and hand it to you, or in some of the altars it might be too far of a distance to do that, or he might just set it down on the side of the altar. Some priests will do that. They'll just put it on the altar for you to get after you serve the cruets. So then he will repose the Blessed Sacrament, the ciborium, in the tabernacle. Genuflect, stand, and lock the tabernacle. When he opens the tabernacle to put the Blessed Sacrament in, it is our custom to make a deep bow out of adoration to the Blessed Sacrament. And then when he closes the tabernacle, and usually you can hear by the key or you can just watch, but when he comes up from that genuflection, right away he closes the door of the tabernacle. The server will stand, and now the Blessed Sacrament is not on the altar. So there is no need for the server to come to the middle and genuflect. He will just simply stand, turn to the right, and go right over here to the cruet table. Now, at the cruet table, he will uncover the cruets, the wine and water, and then he will come around up here like he normally would for presenting the cruets, and go up and stand one step down from the top platform. Now, it's some very short boys that I asked to stand right up on the top because of their size. But we would have you stand one step down. Now, when you go up to the altar, this is what you should do when you're serving alone. First of all, a rule to remember: never, ever, ever set the wine cruet onto the altar, because it will stain. There's a drop of wine, it'll stain the altar cloth or the altar depending where it's set. So this is what I ask you to do. Set the water cruet down on the altar, and you want to put it back a little bit from the edge of the altar. You want to put it back a little bit. Now sometimes there's the chalice veil is there, so don't set it onto the chalice veil. Set it onto the linen of the altar cloth, but not in the corner. And the reason for that is when the priest comes over, that's where he puts the chalice. So the server is attentive. He takes the wine cruet after setting down the water, and takes the wine cruet in his right hand. Now he's going to hold it in such a way that he's ready to pour it. One of the things about holding the wine cruet, do not wrap your fingers around the neck of the cruet like that. Because when you go to pour, your finger may touch the chalice, which is not permitted. So you want to keep your fingers away from the front of the cruet. Some servers will hold it by the bottom, which is okay, or by the handle. So you go to pour the wine. What the server will do, so now he's right up here, standing one step down from the top. The server is right here. When the priest is ready to receive wine, he will tilt the chalice toward you. And then the server will go right up next to the priest and pour in wine. Don't let it come gushing out, not too fast, but also it should be more than just a bare trickle. And then the priest has received the adequate amount. He will lift the chalice slightly, and that's a sign for you to stop. And then I always do, you have a little drop of wine hanging on the cruet, just give it a little bit of a flick like this, and that drop will come down into the chalice. You want to be careful, otherwise it'll come down and maybe get on the altar. So you go up next to the priest to pour wine in. Now, this is one of the things I mentioned before, but I want to point out. Let's say this is the chalice here. Something like that. And he holds it at an angle. So you would want to pour the wine so that the wine will hit the side of the chalice, and then it will come down here and pool on the bottom of the chalice. You don't want to pour the wine so that it comes right down to the bottom. And the reason for that is there is always going to be a few drops of the precious blood. And if you do that, it could splash precious blood out of the chalice. So you pour it so it comes to the side, and then it comes down and pools down here on the bottom. You also want to be careful. I don't have a chalice here to show you, but my fingers here, the chalice. You don't want to hold it real high. You want to have it down about an inch or so above the chalice. And just so you know, for the priest's rubric, he is to take the same amount of wine for the ablutions here after communion as he took during the offertory. And so that's why I say sometimes servers are pouring just the barest tiny trickle, and I'm waiting and waiting because I need to have an adequate amount of wine to adequately purify the chalice. So you go up next to the priest, you pour in the wine. After you do that, you go back to your place here, and you don't pick up the water yet. You still have the wine in the right hand. Now the priest comes over to you. When he comes over to you, you're holding the wine, make a number 2 bow, medium bow to the priest, and he holds the chalice in one of 2 ways. A lot of priests will hold it right on the altar. They'll just set it on the altar with their fingers on it. Sometimes the priest might hold it over to you, but you should really be right there, and so you will pour the wine into the chalice, but over the priest's fingers, and this purifies his fingers. Then after you've poured the wine on his fingers, now you will transfer the wine to your left hand, and then pick up the water cruet with your right hand and pour the water, and then bow and go back to your place. So the rule here is never set the wine cruet on the altar, and number 2, do not, after you've put the water cruet on the altar, do not pick it up until you're actually going to be using it. So after you've poured the wine the second time, the first time is next to the priest, the second time is when he comes over here with the chalice, with his fingers over the chalice, you will pour, and this time it's just a little bit of wine. So this time you pour a very light trickle. He will raise his fingers slightly when he is done, has received an adequate amount to purify his fingers. Then you transfer the wine to your left hand, pick up the water cruet, and now you will pour. Now I would take a generous amount of water to adequately purify the chalice. So when you go up next to the priest, he's taking only wine, the same amount that he took at the offertory. When he comes over to you, there's a little bit of wine and a much greater amount of water. So that's again the problem when you have a server that's barely trickling out, and I'm waiting, because I'd like to receive more water. So the priest is saying a prayer. So you just pour that, and he lifts up his finger slightly when he's had adequate amount of the wine, transfer it to your left hand, pick up the water, same thing, he'll bring up his fingers. And it shouldn't be, again, don't hold the cruet, the mouth of the cruet, the spout, I guess you could say, a big distance above the fingers, or it'll splash, whether it's water or wine. But you don't lay it right on the fingers either. It should be about an inch above the fingers so that he can lift up his fingers without touching the spout of the cruet. So after you've poured the wine, transferred it to your left hand, and then poured the water, and he's lifted up his fingers to indicate he's done, then you'll do that number 2 bow, and you'll turn and go back to the cruet table, and you'll put the cruets back in the cruet table. Now you're going to be changing the book and veil. So now the server will just simply come up here on the side, he will just come up here, and he will pick up the veil here. Come down at an angle, genuflect, go up at an angle, and the book is over here at an angle. And so he will put the veil down to the side, and maybe sometimes servers will slide it under the book a little bit so it'll be closer for the priest to take. But then he will set the veil down on the altar, pick up the missal, go down, genuflect, go up here, and he'll put the missal, and this time the missal is straight. Over here it's at an angle. When he puts it back here, it's straight, like it was at the beginning of Mass. And then after he does that, he turns and comes around, genuflects, and goes over to the left side. Why? Because remember the rule, he's opposite the book. After he puts the book down, he comes around, genuflects, and goes to the left and kneels down. Now, he kneels there, kneeling erect with his hands folded. The priest will finish purifying the chalice, maybe a ciborium, covering it. When he's finished in the middle, he'll go over to the book and read what we call the communion prayer, communion antiphon, and then kiss the altar in the middle, turn Dominus Vobiscum, et cum spiritu tuo, goes back to the book, recites the post-communion prayer, any commemorations, amen, after each per omnia saecula saeculorum. Then he closes the book and goes to the middle again. So this time you're just kneeling there saying the amen or et cum spiritu tuo as need be. When the priest is finished with the prayers, he closes the book, goes to the middle, kisses the altar. Once again he turns, says Dominus Vobiscum, et cum spiritu tuo, and then he will either say ite missa est, which is most of the time, you would say Deo gratias, Or, when there was no Gloria at the Mass, he will say, Benedicamus Domino, and you'll say Deo Gratia, same thing. Or, if it's a Requiem Mass, he will turn back to the altar and say, Requiescant in pace, and you say, Amen. And then the priest bows, he says the Placiat prayer, and then Benedicat vos omnipotens Deus, he says facing the altar, bows to the crucifix turn, gives the blessing, and say Amen at the end of that blessing. A lot of times servers forget that Amen. So you say the Amen, then you'll stand, and he begins the last gospel. You'll stand in your place here, he turns, he comes over here to the side, and he's reading it from the card. Now the card becomes, as it were, the book. The card over here with the last gospel takes the place of the book. So after you sign yourself and say, Gloria Tibi Domine, you will go over here, genuflect, and go over to this side so that you're opposite the card. However, depending on the church, here at our main church, the server will get the microphone for the priest to use for prayers after Mass. So after you've signed yourself, before you go over here, you'll get the microphone from the pulpit, put that out here, if that's to be done. You'll go over here, genuflect, and before you go to your place, you can go over to the cruet table and get the card for the prayers after Mass, or any booklets or devotions that are going to be led, whatever the priest needs. And you may get his biretta, and you come back to your place, and now you're standing here as the priest finishes the last gospel. And I said biretta, but you could wait on the birettas. You know, too many things. You get the card. Priest comes down after the last gospel and kneels down. You're going to be next to him. Now, you'll either kneel right next to him on the step, or in some places the custom is on the floor next to the priest, so he will recite the prayers after Mass. After he's finished with that, he will rise and go up the altar to get the chalice. When he does that, you will go over and get the priest's biretta. And then you'll come back next to him, you genuflect, you hand him the biretta, and then you turn and lead the priest into the sacristy. If you're in a church that has only an entrance from the left side, then you'll have to go around him to the left side. But the proper way is to enter from the gospel side and return by the epistle side. So that concludes serving alone. And now in our next class, we're going to go over the rubrics for serving with someone else, two servers serving together.